Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Bullony Basketball. As you can see, I'm here with my guy, Devin, also known as Run the NBA. How's it going?
Going pretty good, pretty good. Playoff ball is always a good time.
Yes, sir. I know last season, I had all the 3 Point Weekly counterparts on separate, then brought you guys all back together. This season, have you guys all together, and then maybe one by one, have you guys on separate. So, mixing it up there. But I think we're going to recap the first round series. We'll just go one by one with each series. And I think we'll start off with the Eastern Conference side of things. So the 1 seed Cleveland Cavaliers and the 8 seed Miami Heat. The Cavs steamrolled them in the last game, really most of the series, other than I think game two. But it was not really much of a series. So I guess what do you make of this series here, and then maybe the Heat as they go into the offseason?
Yeah, this was, like you say, it was ugly for sure. Game two gave me a little bit of hope that maybe Miami were going to be a little bit more competitive at home. Maybe they were going to be able to steal one somehow. But that's not exactly how it turned out, to say the least. So it was a rough showing for Miami. Davion Mitchell probably earned himself a good contract this offseason. I'll give him that because he was great in this series. He was a very lone bright spot for Miami in this series. Hero was pretty good outside of game four, but after that, yeah, it wasn't great. Haywood Smith was okay, but it wasn't great after that. I mean, it is what it is. Cleveland showed why they were the 1 seed, and their depth was great. Ty Jerome was great off the bench. DeAndre Hunter was great off the bench. Donovan Mitchell did his thing. Max Strus had a good 3 point shooting series. So they had what they do well working, even with Garland missing half the series. So it's what you expect from a 1-8 when you have the disparity of what is the top of the top in the East compared to what you see squeaking in through the play-in in the Eastern Conference, especially in what was going into the play-in a 10 seed on Miami. So may have been the first 10 seed to get in through the play-in, but they didn't exactly give a good showing for said 10 seeds for future chances in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was what you'd expect from a 1-8, and really, like you said, also like a 1-10, which is the only time we've ever seen something like that. So it's not a surprise, but you do expect, like, if there's anyone that's like a 10 seed that could pull it off, could it be the team that made the finals as an 8 seed like 2 years ago, and took a game from Boston without Jimmy Butler last year? So I thought it would at least be competitive, but it really wasn't outside of that one game. You did mention Davion Mitchell. I think not only in this series, but also especially in that Hawks game, like the last one that got them to the playoffs, like that was a huge, that was huge for him potentially getting a bigger bag. Just looking at the Heat, though, like, you got big questions with Tyler Hero, and it's like, is he the guy that you could really, invest in? I know he was an all-star this year, but I mean, just his performance throughout most of the series, especially the last game, like you have to start to think like maybe he can't be our guy. He could be a second option. He could be a third option. But I think for the longest time, like there were people that were rumored to go to Miami, and the Heat just didn't want to deal off of Tyler Hero. So I think you got to look at that. You got to look at I think Bam's like press conference like after the playoff series. He basically said there's going to be a lot of changes to come. So you don't know like where his mindset is at, like with Miami, and then a guy like Andrew Wiggins, who you got in there too. Like he just really seems like his time with the Heat had a lot of ups and downs in this season. Like I know he's only been there for about 3 months, but it already feels like it's been such a roller coaster where, some games it looks like, oh yeah, like we traded Jimmy for the right guy. Other games it's like, where is this guy at? So that's kind of like my mindset on the Heat. The Cavs, I picked them to win, but I did think the Heat would get one game. So I guess from that perspective, I was a little disappointed in Miami.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting where Miami look to go moving forward. I mean, like you say, I think Hero in the role that he had when Butler was there and what was in terms of at least Miami performances, Jimmy Butler of old, he was in a relatively good role if he was still playing as well as he is now, as opposed to some of the more lackluster performances he may have had at times back then, compared to where he's at in terms of being an all-star now. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, Adebayo's just signed a new extension. He's got 4 years still left on his deal. So hard to see him going anywhere soon, but Hero, extension eligible this summer. Wiggins, extension eligible this summer. Terry Rozier, extension eligible this summer. So either we're going to see them continue to commit down this core, or, which is probably more likely, they're going to start to realize that, yeah, we might need to hit a bit more of a more aggressive retool and potentially a soft rebuild, because like you say, Tyler Hero did have a good season. He did become an all-star, but he's definitely not a number one, not on a team that's going to cause any damage. So either they got to find that number one, which the assets for which are limited to do here, or what is probably more likely long-term is they're going to have to move off of a guy like Hero and go more of a long-term route to figure out where the future of Miami basketball is headed to. And
names are always linked to Miami. So, I mean, it seems like they're going to be like a prime destination regardless. It's just a matter of, if Pat Riley, assuming he's, still going to be there. I know some people are saying like maybe he's going to step down and stuff. But assuming he's going to be there because he still is currently, it's just a matter of like, is he going to, pull the trigger on trading some of these guys rather than in the past where he didn't want to trade Tyler Hero for like Donovan Mitchell. He didn't want to trade Tyler Hero for Damian Lillard. So we'll just have to see, I guess. But another team that has, a lot of guys that they're paying and they're going to have to make a decision this summer, but they did win this series as the Boston Celtics. Won 4-1 over the Orlando Magic. I know you're a Raptor fan, but I know that you do also like the Orlando Magic yourself. So what do you make of this series here and maybe what the Magic need moving forward?
Yeah, like you say, this was definitely a tough series for Orlando, but at least they got a game. We'll take it in game against Boston, but this series was about as I expected. This was the type of series where at home with Orlando's tough defense, you can see them getting a win because of their defense, but you knew the offense was going to struggle. I mean, they only hit 100 once, and that wasn't even the game they won. That continues to be the issue for Orlando. It's no secret. The defense is great. The physicality is there. The intensity is there. The coaching is there. It's great. It's just where can they get the offense and where can they get the shooting? The hope was that KCP was going to help in that regard this year, and then he just went and had a stinker of a season. And at his age, don't know if we're counting on a bounce back or if this is just the new KCP. So that's a bit alarming if you're Orlando, considering that was your splash while you had free agency, because you don't have cap space anymore now that you've got Paolo and Franz locked down. So that's a concern. But beyond that, sure, Jalen Suggs was out, but it just isn't going to make that much of a difference. And we're still relying on Cole Anthony and Anthony Black to give us an offensive punch off the bench. It's just not there. So I love the fundamentals, but something has to change. There has to be some type of trade to get them some type of creation from the guard spot and some type of three-point shooting from some of their other guys. How they go about that, hard to say, but one of Suggs or God forbid if someone amazing comes on the market that really helps, maybe Franz is on the move, although that one's probably less likely. But they certainly have some things to figure out. As much as their core is really good and really fun, the pieces around them have got a long way to go. But Boston's performance was really good. Jason Tatum, especially in this series, was very good. One of the better playoff series I've had him have in recent memory, given in a first-round matchup against a 7 seed, but a formidable defense. So certainly worth noting how good he was offensively, very good on the glass, good on both ends of the floor. And this was still when you had a little bit of injury concerns. Of course, Tatum missed the game. Jrue Holiday missed a few games in this series, which Boston did noticeably miss him defensively a little bit. Paolo had a bit of easier time on the offensive end to an extent without him, but they still did more than fine because they could sell out on the guys who couldn't shoot threes, which is most of the Orlando roster. So Boston were fine here, and Tatum especially was the great thing. The only concerning thing for me in this series was Porzingis looked very bad in about every regard offensively. The three-point shot wasn't falling. The post-ups that he was so great and efficient at last season, useless in this series. Even when he was getting switched on to Corey Joseph at times, he just didn't look comfortable in them at all. So that's something to keep an eye on going forward. But other than that, I liked what I saw from Boston.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about, what you said with Porzingis there. It's like him, probably Drew Holiday, Al Horford. Like Boston eventually is going to have to make a decision maybe this summer about one or a couple of those guys. Just because of how much money they're allotting. And I know that's not something for this season because they're still playing, but you look at a guy like Porzingis in that series, and if they manage to get eliminated later on in the playoffs, like that might be one of the things they look at. Like, well, he really didn't help us in the championship last year, and he didn't really show up for us this year. But with that being said, I do think the Magic still had a good chance in a lot of these games. I think game 2 and game 4 were very winnable, and then they just kind of fell apart down the stretch. And that's one of the biggest reasons why they do need like more offensive scoring punch, like you said, preferably on the perimeter. Like I know Anthony Simons has been rumored there. I know that, some people are saying maybe go after a LaMelo Ball or something like that. And I know like a guy like LaMelo isn't known for his defense, but you have so many defenders around him. And, if maybe like he plays with like 2 other guys that can get their own potentially at some points, like Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, he's got a defense around him, something to play for, I guess, because he doesn't really have that in Charlotte a lot of the time. It could do wonders, but I think that they have to do something. It's really interesting with their guard play because I know last year, like they had so many guards and it's like, well, what are they going to do? How are they going to change it? And then people thought, oh, they're going to get rid of Gary Harris. They brought him back. And then Markelle Fultz went out the door. And then they still have Cole Anthony. They still have Jalen Suggs. They have Anthony Black. Like, they still kind of have that question there, but they don't really have that guy on the perimeter who they can go to. Like, this team is so limited because if they're ever down 3 points at the end of a game, I don't trust them because they're not going to be able to get a late shot to tie it and force overtime. Like it's just over from there. And there were a few games like that this year, but I just think in general, you need a guy like that can make you more of a threat in those situations, especially like when they start blowing leads late in games that they could have won. Like I don't think it's too far-fetched to say it could have been a 2-2 series. It could have theoretically been a 3-1 series, but that's like a best case scenario. I think they could have got it to 2-2 though, and then they just folded in the game 5.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like you say, they just need someone on the perimeter, 3-point shooting preferably, but even just from a creation standpoint, because everything is just Paolo Franz, and they are good creators for their position, well above league average, but it's just so much to ask of these guys night in, night out. Okay, you got to score. You got to be elite defenders. You got to be our primary creators for everyone who can't hit threes when you kick it out to them. Like, it's so much, man. So ideally, like you say, it's a LaMelo. If Trae Young becomes available this summer, maybe you look at him. Ideally, that's the type of guy you're going for, but at least someone who can consistently shoot some amount of threes and create, because currently Lord knows we had to play Corey Joseph starting in a playoff series in 2025, which great NBA career in 2025. That is horrifying. And then even Jalen Suggs when he's back, again, amazing defender. You guys have enough defenders on the team that you got to forego that for offense somewhere at some point. Mm-hmm. They'll cover up the slack in behind them. They have so much defensive talent. They got to just prioritize at least a guy at the guard spot. And then hopefully over time you can get a couple of wings that can start to hit more threes. Maybe Tristan da Silva improves his 3-point shot a bit more and you can bring in another piece or two. But yeah, offense has got a ways to go, but they got the hard part. They got their 2 stars. So hopefully they can figure it out from there.
For sure. And you mentioned defense. I think we could, move along here to this next series that had a lot of defensive firepower, mostly because a lot of the games were low scoring, and that was the Knicks and the Pistons. The Knicks ended up winning this series in 6 games, but it really did feel like a 7-game series type of energy the whole time. So I guess, like, what do you make of this battle between, 2 hard-nosed teams that played 90s basketball, and it was their first time facing in the playoffs since the 90s too?
Yeah, you hit it on the nose, man. This series felt like an old school battle. This was a fun series to watch as someone who loves good physical defensive basketball, but it was fun right off the get-go, too, just from a scheme standpoint. I mean, a ton of cross-matching in the series. We saw, in terms of the Karl-Anthony Towns matchup, we saw a bunch of Tobias Harris guarding him throughout the series. We see OG on Cade Cunningham a bunch, and that was a really interesting matchup as OG, just his pure strength that he has as such a good on-ball defender really was disturbing for Cade as much as he tried to get things going in the series. That was really interesting to watch. We saw Brunson having to deal with the absurd length and athleticism of Asar Thompson. It was so many interesting matchups, not to mention the fact that it was just such tension and so many little scuffles that you saw throughout the series. It was very fun to watch, but ultimately this was a series where Cade was everything for Detroit. As much as they had some guys step up, Schroeder, very good series until the back end. And then from there, it was a little bit more hit and miss. Malik Beasley struggled at times, had a couple of good games later on in the series, and game one was okay. Tim Hardaway Jr., typical style, had a couple of good games, but then was useless for the rest of the series. About the only other consistent part was Tobias Harris. He was relatively good throughout the entire series, which was very much needed as about the only veteran on the team that actually gave them a steady veteran presence outside of Dennis Schroeder. But it was tough to see what we were getting with from especially Malik Beasley, someone that you would have hoped would have had a little bit of a better playoff showing as great of a season as he had. The threes just weren't falling games 2 to 4. And if you get a little bit more of his 3-point shooting going the right way, especially in a game like game 3, where it comes down to that tough play at the end with Tim Hardaway, it's not like games 2 and 4 weren't close either. They were decided by a combined 7 points. So, there was some tight games in there too. They obviously got, but 3 and 4, you'd would have liked to see if that would have potentially swung the tide, but it was tough for them. I mean, it's a young group with a lot of them getting their first playoff experience, and ultimately that's the biggest thing for them here. Jalen Brunson, although inefficient, did what he needed to from a production standpoint, and after that, Karl-Anthony Towns did his threes, and OG continued to do what he does defensively on Cade, and that was massive for them. Once Cade got those switches onto Mikal Bridges, much easier for him to get what he wanted offensively. It's just that added strength that OG has that was so difficult for Cade to deal with and so difficult for most guys to deal with, especially a guard, even though Cade is a bigger one. But the only other player I want to note for the Knicks, silently and didn't necessarily do anything flashy as he typically does, but Josh Hart, another great series, just everything, defense, rebounding, had a lot of high assist games in this series too, even though they were pretty well sagging off of him at times. They had Duran on him at times, so he could just sit in the paint, but always productive for them. And at the very least, they didn't even have to play a game 7 in what would have been a series that probably would have gave them a few more nicks and bruises if they had to go another one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think really with this series, a guy like you said, Malik Beasley, first of all, he needs to just probably stay off social media. I think that's part of the reason why he just was not doing too hot. I mean, he played good the first game, but that was really about it. And then, a lot of those guys you said, like, kind of struggle. Like Tim Hardaway Jr. was very hit or miss. But I mean, that's kind of the story of his career. Asar Thompson was not really doing much offensively other than the one game. So, I mean, like, there was just a lot that they were missing out on. In fact, like, it really was a home court disadvantage because they won 2 of the 3 games in New York, which a lot of people, I think, were probably penciling in, like, the Knicks are definitely going to win these games, or they're going to win all but one of them or something like that. And then it didn't happen that way. And now, granted, like, you could argue the game, like you said, with the missed call on Tim Hardaway Jr. at the end, or, really the game they should be looking at where they blew that lead. And I think the Knicks went on like a 21-0 run. Like, I know that was the first playoff game for a lot of people, like, but you just got to be able to, pull it together there. At least, you can't allow a run like that, especially in a low scoring game. That's incredibly deflating. But yeah, I mean, Tobias Harris was good. On the other side, I know, like you said, like Brunson and Cat really did their thing. OG Anunoby was huge, but it was a really good series, and I think honestly for the Knicks moving forward, it's definitely prepared them for the worst because a team that's like young, scrappy, and can play defense like that, like they're probably already a little bit beat up in the first round. Usually you might see that from guys like in the conference finals and stuff, but it seems like it might be like a little bit more downhill from here in that respect. going against like some other juggernauts of the East, and then whoever comes out of the West, if they get there, it's going to be tough. But I don't know. I think that this was a good series. I was kind of hoping it would go 7 games though, but yeah, I think that the other thing is too, and I don't know what you'll think about this, but I know Cade likes to play in pace and stuff, but I feel like he needs to get a little bit more like shifty with his ball handling. I think that was kind of a detriment, and I'm pretty sure at the very end of the last game he lost the ball, and it really cost him like that like final chance. Not the Malik Beasley play where he couldn't catch the ball, but like before that, I think they were down 1 and they could have taken the lead, and he just like lost the ball there. But there were other plays too throughout the series where I'm like, I feel like if his ball handling was a little bit more sharp, he would be able to get to his spots a little better. You see that from guys like, Luka's not fast, but Luka can play a little bit shifty and do a little stop and go action. I think that if Cade can get a little bit more smooth on that, like moving forward, it's going to be really hard to stop him.
Yeah, for sure. But definitely still got a lot of skill in that area. But yeah, like you say, for someone who's got a ton of volume on the ball, like he does, such a high usage rate, yeah, a little bit of extra acceleration and deceleration, a bit of a tighter handle in those types of situations. I think that'll definitely help him. Another thing that I think would have helped him in general throughout the series is a lot of the series, they just seem to be pure Cade beat OG, and they didn't really get Duren involved in as many ball screens as I would have liked. That might have helped a bit as well. Not that Duren has the most amazing hands that you would have necessarily got him a ton of scenarios in the role that you might have liked, especially with some of the length that the Knicks might have had in some of those matchups, especially when Mitchell Robinson was on the floor. But even still, just if it's to get Cade a little bit freed up and get a little bit of space from there, I think that might have helped him a bit as well.
Yeah, like even in it was the first game, they said the first lob it was like a pick and roll lob and then throw to Duren was in the third quarter. And then I was watching like the second game, it didn't happen until the fourth quarter. So I know they won game 2, but that was kind of one of the main things that would work for them offensively throughout the year, and they just weren't really getting it. So it's tough. I think you definitely got to make adjustments, but we'll just see how they respond, next year, especially. I'm sure they'll probably be a playoff team barring any like severe injuries or something, but we could move on to the last series in the Eastern Conference. We got the Pacers and the Bucks. This was probably seen as a closer series before it started. I think even from the start of game 1, you kind of had a feeling it's like, okay, well, if Dame doesn't come back and Dame doesn't come back like Dame, this is not even going to be a series. And he came back, but he didn't look like Dame that was fully healthy, and it was over in like 5 games. Granted, the Bucks should have still won that last game. That was a terrible choke job by any typical Doc Rivers team. But what do you make of this series, and really what the Bucks need to do next? Because some people are already like photoshopping Giannis and other jerseys, and it's just not looking too good for them on an aging team.
Yeah, the aging part is definitely concerning. We'll get to them and the great Doc Rivers and their Game 5 choke. I'll give a bit of credit to the Pacers first here. Mm-hmm. Siakam was great through this series. Full credit to him with regards to dealing with Giannis. You definitely can't stop him, and Siakam, as good of a defender as he is, certainly doesn't have quite the length and strength you'd like. But Giannis, although he was very good in this series, wasn't exactly as uber efficient and as uber productive as some may have expected. So the fact that Siakam, as the primary guy, obviously Miles Turner and Aaron Naismith saw some time on him as well. As the primary guy, he did very well here, and yet still contributed on offense. And after that, it was just the absurd level of efficiency from the role players. Even in Milwaukee on the road, where role players notoriously don't show up in the playoffs, they were all hitting Naismith, whether it be Newhart, McConnell had a few good games, Obi Toppin had some good games and some good three-point shooting. They were all just making it very, very nice for Indiana's offense. It made it much easier for Halliburton to create for everyone. People had to respect shooters, and then that allowed him to get his game going a little bit more later in the series. So credit to them for being as good as a shooting team as they were, and for all the role players for showing up. Now, as far as Milwaukee goes, I could say a lot about their Game 5 choke. What I will say that I'm most concerned about is that the change in the lineup didn't happen until Game 5.
Yeah.
And that was my biggest issue because it was clear as day in this series that Brook Lopez was not going to be able to be effective, that you needed Gary Trent to space the floor if you were going to be able to give Giannis a chance to do anything. And AJ Green was obviously a help in that. Now, at least Ryan Rollins got taken out of the lineup pretty early because he was very much a negative, zero at best in this series. But they finally figured it out in Game 5. It just unfortunately took them 4 games and 3 losses to figure out that Ryan Rollins wasn't going to do it. Once Dame wasn't in, how are you going to replace that? Well, you would like to think that you would bring in your best shooter and probably your next best perimeter scorer in Gary Trent, but it took us a little bit too long to get him involved. Brook Lopez, who hit a few threes, made a few blocks, but if he had to step outside of the paint to defend at this point in his career, it was game over. So that was just not going to work. It took you till Game 5 to get Bobby Portis a big enough role and get Brook Lopez out. That was my biggest concern because barring the choke, they looked like they finally had things figured out in Game 5. Now, Gary Trent, would he have probably done that again to that level? Probably not. But it would have been a hell of a lot better of what they would have been doing otherwise. The fact that it took us that long to figure that out is the biggest issue I had with the Bucks. Now, obviously, Game 5 was an issue at the end, but until then, I'll give them credit for what they did in that game. AJ Green and Gary Trent and KPJ, they were all doing what they needed to do outside of the typical Giannis production. But yeah, too long to make the changes. And Doc Rivers has been coaching way, way too long to be giving him the benefit of the doubt to be making those types of changes any sooner than that. But I'm not exactly expecting it from him because we know Doc Rivers isn't exactly some adjustment savant in the playoffs. So here we are with the Bucks losing in 5.
Yep. I mean, you kind of hit it on the nail. There's not a whole lot to add, but what I will say is, just in general, I know you said like this wasn't going to be a good series for Brook Lopez. I just don't know if Brook Lopez is really a center like that anymore. I feel like his decline over the last couple years has really been glaring. That's not to say he can't play in the NBA or something or be a backup big, but I just don't think he could really be a starting big that can play huge minutes anymore, especially if you're trying to compete for a championship. And any team with Giannis and Dame is going to have that hope. Now, though, it's just really concerning because, I mean, Dame is probably out all next season. So you don't know what's going to really happen with him. This team, it's like the hardest part is that like no one's probably going to want to trade for him because you don't know how he's going to come back from that. Historically speaking, yeah, like recently there might have been guys who had an Achilles tear, the most notable one, being Kevin Durant, and it's like, oh, he came back and he's still playing like Kevin Durant. But it's a little bit tougher, I think, for a lot of smaller guys. Just in general, smaller guards have not had the same success coming off of it. And I had a feeling even before the series, I know it's not like directly connected, but I just felt like it was wrong for Dame to even be playing. The fact that he had the blood clot thing. And I'm like, if he's coming back that quick, it doesn't feel right. I don't want something to happen. And then it's like, they're going to regret it. And sure enough, something did. But with that being said, I just generally think like the Pacers were the better team like this season. Even if the Bucks were playing like at full strength, this was going to be a long series. And even if the Bucks did win, they were going to win based on star power. They were not going to win based on their team because the Pacers just have a better team. You mentioned like Nesmith was hitting shots, like Ben Mathurin, TJ McConnell, all these guys really, Obi Toppin was even hitting threes. Like all these guys really help out Halliburton and make his job so much easier. It's one of the deepest teams in the entire league. And that's why I feel like so many people think they're like, a sleeper team right now. I don't know. It's just, they definitely had the better team. I'm not surprised that they won this series. And that's why I picked them too. Like even when Dame was out to start it, because even if Dame came back 100%, I feel like missing that first game or two was going to be the difference because you're not going to be able to make that up with a team that you at best maybe play about even with like over the course of the next few games. And wasn't even really that close to say the least.
Yeah, no, it really wasn't. Like you say, even if healthy, I think the Pacers are always going to have a very good chance in this series. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Milwaukee. I mean, like you say, Dame is almost 35. What does the future look like for him? Gary Trent, you somehow fell into him being on what was essentially a minimum contract last year. If he's back, he's not back on that cheap of money, and you can't offer him that much more because they don't have his bird rights. So he's probably out the door. And then you look at Brook Lopez, free agent. Now, do you want him to be your starting center? Probably not, but he still has some value, as you alluded to, even if it's not as a starter these days. So got to deal with him potentially walking out the door. So do I think that Giannis is getting traded this summer? I don't know. Probably not, but I think it's definitely in the cards given the fact that this roster is only getting older and probably worse going into next season.
Yeah, I think especially too after, the Luka trade, like a lot of people are still saying like that trade is going to have people looking at a different way at their teams, and teams are going to be making like serious pitches for star players, probably more than ever this summer. I wouldn't expect Giannis to get traded because I just don't know where's the best fit for him right now. But wouldn't totally shock me, So, the next series we got wasn't really much of a series either. First two games were blowouts. The third game was actually kind of interesting, and then after like halftime, it quickly became not interesting. And then game 4, it just felt like it was already over. Thunder and Grizzlies, OKC swept them. What do you make of this series? What do you make of the Grizzlies going into the summer now, like getting swept? You fired your coach the last couple of weeks of the season, and probably some questions about your core too.
Yeah, definitely some questions about the core in Memphis. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is extension eligible and has 1 year left on his deal going into the summer. So that's going to be the most interesting part. And unfortunately for him, he did not look good at all in the postseason. The offense wasn't great. The three-point shooting wasn't great. Any mismatches he had, he didn't really take advantage of. And the DPOI performances of years past seemingly completely gone from existence. And his rebounding still sucks. So, there's clear value here. And obviously, I don't expect the entirety of his playoff history going forward to be that bad of a shooting performance, but it's certainly worrisome, and it certainly could cause some pause for thought for Memphis when you already have Ja and Desmond Bane locked down, and you're potentially looking at giving this guy a max or near max contract this summer. So I think there's going to be a little bit more hesitation in the Grizzlies front office this summer with regards to paying Jaren, or at least paying him as much as he wants, compared to what they might have had pre-postseason and pre the end of the season. Does that mean they move him? Does that mean they look to move Desmond Bane? Does that mean they look to move John Morant? Remains to be seen, but I think at least going into maybe not next year, but at least a year beyond, I think it's hard to imagine that all three of these guys are going to be on the roster, A, because it's a lot of money, and B, now they've had another postseason run where they haven't quite gotten where they wanted to. Desmond Bane, on the note of stars not playing well, also didn't really get comfortable at all in this series. The three-point shooting wasn't there. The efficiency wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere near the production that they're looking for from him. Ja, when on the floor and when he was healthy, was quite good and was comfortably the best Grizzlies player in this series. Unfortunately, he then picked up that injury, and of course, they then blew that game that he got injured in, unfortunately. But outside of that, kudos to Zach Edey. He looked quite good in this series after he had a very good / horrible playing experience, which was very hard for my brain to make out because he had some great and horrific things going on, but he looked much more stably good in this series. So a good sign from him. And also, Santi Aldama had a very good series as well, which was a nice sign to see because they're going to have to pay him this summer, and they probably should based on what they saw from him. But definitely some bigger decisions in Santi Aldama to be made in the next little bit for Memphis. As far as OKC, like you say, it was a relatively dominant performance from them, as you would have expected. Jalen Williams was, in my opinion, by far the best player on the floor throughout the series. Caruso, even offensively, looked better than we saw in the regular season, which is kind of what you'd expect from a guy like Caruso, so that was good to see in the postseason. The biggest concern for me was that SGA just never really looked comfortable offensively. I believe it was game 3 where he was a little bit more efficient, but he was really struggling to find a shot. Hopefully that is just a first round thing for them, and that's not something that OKC continue to deal with. But if it is, going to be a problem, because against Memphis it's not an issue. Against future teams like Denver now might be more of an issue.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think really just this series in general was like not super detailed, I guess, like for the fun elements of it. But, you know, with the Grizzlies, I know you mentioned like with Jaren and with Desmond Bane, it's like they're definitely going to have to, you know, look at them and maybe a little bit differently this summer. But I even think maybe Ja, like they could. I know Ja is like really the face of their team, like most would say, and probably the best player like he could really be the star that takes over games. But you have to factor in too, this is, I'm pretty sure, the fourth year in a row where he has not finished the season. Like he's been hurt, you know, like I'm pretty sure he's been in the play-in, playoffs or whatever for 5 of his 6 seasons, and only once did he actually like make the playoffs and finish the year healthy, and it was in 2021. I don't know. I just think like eventually, like you look at that like the same way that we were just talking about with Giannis, and like how maybe the other teams are looking at that, ready to make a pitch. Like it's Luka Doncic being handled by Nico Harrison, and he's on the table and stuff like that. You know, it's just going to be an interesting offseason for them because they have so many questions. And especially too, like I even felt a little bit more like questioning of this when, you know, Scottie Pippen Jr. played well in the series. Like they kept talking about him like, boy, he's going to be a guy that like could be a really important piece of this team. And now you don't want him to be like your starting guard necessarily, but if you have a guy like him in the meantime and you see like what deals you could get for Ja and see like how that maybe transforms the team, I could see them maybe doing that. Will they? I don't know, but I could see them at least like weighing their options. And that's why I think it's going to be an interesting offseason for them. But with the Thunder, doesn't surprise me that they won. They were just the better team. I predicted this would be a sweep too. You know, but that game 3 does, like, the Grizzlies were not going to win the series, in my opinion, but it does make it a little bit interesting because maybe they could have forced it to 6 games or something. I think they definitely would have won game 3 if Ja stayed healthy. I think we can agree on that probably, but
for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if you want, we can move on here to this best of 7 series that went to 7 games between the Golden State Warriors and the Houston Rockets. And, you know, the Warriors, once again, beating the Rockets, pretty much been a theme in history over the last decade. Only this time it's really a different Warriors and Rockets team, but at least the core of the Rockets is, like, vastly different than it used to be with, you know, Harden and Chris Paul and, like, those days and stuff. You know, what are your thoughts on the Houston Rockets? You know, they were the 2nd seed this year, winning 52 games, a huge turnaround. I think for cores that like it's their first time making the playoffs, usually it's like a 6, 7, 8 seed that they get. You know, you're looking at like Detroit, like on the other side. Orlando, still a fairly new playoff team. You know, they're down there too, and this team jumped all the way to 2nd. So I guess like, what do you make of their season? What's to come for them? And just, you know, the Warriors trying to fulfill Draymond's promise that he said they're going to win the championship, and right now they still have a chance to do that.
They sure do. But yeah, for Houston, it's interesting for them. Like you say, it's a 2 seed, and you'd expect a 2 seed to be more of a favorite and more of a team that can assert their dominance in a series. But they're a younger team, like you mentioned. But I think it's also important to note that this is very untypical of a 2-7 series, that they weren't even necessarily considered the favorite coming into this series. And in many respects, understandably so, because the Warriors were one of the best teams in the league post-trade deadline once they acquired Jimmy Butler. So this was always going to be a very difficult matchup for them. This was not a standard 2-7 matchup, especially when you consider just how good the Western Conference was this year. There was very little separating some of those teams in the middle of the pack, and the Warriors were very among them. So this was always going to be a difficult battle for them. And considering their inexperience, sure, they had a few pieces like a Fred VanVleet, who, especially in the later half of the series, had some very good games, and Steven Adams, who was very crucial, especially to their absurdly productive zone defense that caused a lot of problems for the Warriors throughout games 4 to 6 in the series. But it was very, very interesting to see this chess match. Udoka and Kerr was a very good coaching matchup in its own right. And I think Houston still did very well here, despite how they did lose. But with this youth, I think just getting this experience is very valuable for them. Jalen Green was the young guy that I was most alarmed by, but for a younger guard who still has a little bit of a more unclear role in this team compared to most of the other guys in this squad, I can kind of live with that. Sengun, Game 7 wasn't what you wanted, but I think you still saw signs of him being able to perform in the postseason. And Thompson, for a guy at his defensive physicality and his defensive tenacity, foul trouble is going to be a thing that he's going to have to continue to look at in the postseason. But offensively, he still got involved well. And Jabari Smith and Tari Eason, I thought, were great off of the bench for the most part throughout the series. They hit a relatively good rate of their threes, and they were amazing defensively. The fact that that was how they competed against a team that has as much experience as the Warriors, and although it is a very different Warriors team than years past, it's still a very good and productive and experienced one. I think it was a very good showing for them. As far as the Warriors go, some of their adjustments mid-series when they were losing some of those games in the middle of the series were interesting. Gary Payton Jr. in the starting lineup, or Gary Payton II, I should say. Interesting. I'm not sure what the thought process was there on Steve Kerr's part, but Curry did his part for the most part, and shout out Buddy Hield, man. Buddy Hield showed up when they needed him. He was quiet through a lot of the series, but he showed up when they needed him.
Yeah, no, he was really like the MVP, I would say, of Game 7, which is crazy because last year was like his first time in the playoffs, and he didn't really play all too hot, and then this year he kind of just looked like Oklahoma, Buddy Hield. But no, I agree. I think that, the experience definitely like won out. The Rockets, forcing it to 7 games after being down 3-1 was pretty impressive. I kind of just thought they would fold in Game 5 or at the latest Game 6. So the fact they even got to a Game 7 at that point did surprise me, and I was impressed. They just really, maybe they need a vet that has like just great shot IQ. Because I feel like, a guy like Fred VanVleet, who, he's a great player and he can hit like a lot of clutch shots. He's shown it with your Raptors in the 2019 finals. But really, he's kind of like the only vet that's kind of like a 3-level threat. That rhymed. But he's kind of like the only one that I guess like can give these guys like tips on like, where you need to be taking shots here and there. And I think they got carried away with the fast break, the transition, even if it wasn't like off a steal or if it was even after a made basket. And it was leading to a lot of bad shots. I think I saw that a lot from Jalen Green, from Amen Thompson. I saw it a little bit from Jabari Smith. Like, it's just, you can't afford that in the playoffs, especially against a team like the Warriors, who are known for running and gunning, and they have, probably, the greatest shooter ever, and then one of the greatest shooters ever in Buddy Hield. Like, that's just a recipe for disaster. And Game 7, Draymond Green, who was playing like one of the better shooters ever the other night, especially like he started off in 2 threes, but you just can't afford that. I think that they will be better, but that's probably the guy they need more so. I know that they're saying like, oh, they should get Kevin Durant, they should get Giannis, and they're rumoring every star to go there now. But I think that they need a guy who, or a couple guys really, because it can't just be one that can, sit down and have one-on-ones with these other guys and like get them to, I guess, taking more high quality shots. Because not everything is going to be a fast break or a transition. It's great when they get a steal, especially on the perimeter, but after a made basket and the defense is set, I think that's what really hurt them the most, because it allowed the Warriors to just like string together a lot of points. And then you look at like, that was the difference in the game. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think depth at the guard spot and having those guys that can control the game a little bit more, be a little bit more mindful of those situations. I think that's, like you say, probably the biggest need for them, because off the bench, no guards, other than a little bit of spot air and holiday minutes. That was it. You see a big and you see two wings. And after that, sure, you have technically three guards in the starting lineup, but two of them are very young. Two of them are very run and gun and just pushing the pace, running the floor, fast break, fast break, fast break. And that's the priority, especially with Amin Thompson and still to a point Jalen Green. So I think some of that certainly is something they need to address. One of it on the bench. Another one of it, if you look at, does a Devin Booker become available? I think he slots in maybe directly for a Jalen Green quite well. I don't know if they'd be willing to part with him. I'd argue they probably should if you can get Devin Booker in return, but those are probably the types of moves you could potentially look at if you want someone who can be an ISO scorer at times, improve your three-point shooting even more, and have a little bit more of a guy who's willing to slow things down, have that playoff experience, work the in-between game a little bit more as well. I think he'd be a good fit, but that remains to be seen what they're going to do there. Nonetheless, the fact that they performed as well as they did, they fought back as well as they did, that's the biggest green flag for me, given where they were at down 3-1 and given the fact they were playing an experienced Warriors team.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting, especially because he is a guy who's, known for being an efficient three-level scorer. You add him in place of a guy like Jalen Green, who hasn't, a guy with finals experience too. I think that could be huge. But right now, it's like the Rockets definitely, have a young core and they don't need to rush. But I think there are some things they could tweak here or there to set them up better, even just for next season. So, yeah. But if you want, we can jump here to this next series with the Timberwolves and the Lakers. Everyone penciled in, I think, the Lakers to win this series as the higher seed with Luka, with LeBron, with Austin Reeves, and they did not, and it really was not. I wouldn't say it wasn't close. So some of the games were close, but you look at 4-1, and it's like, well, the Timberwolves kind of did their thing. So what do you make of the way that the Timberwolves performed in this series, and what the Lakers have to look at now in the offseason?
There's a lot to look at from this series, and certainly they need to address some things, most notably, obviously, the center that they obviously didn't get at the last second or after the last second, per se, at the trade deadline. But the two things I want to point on is the center matchup and just the Lakers defense as a whole. That center matchup was probably the biggest thing in this series, because a lot of the reasons that people were looking at the Lakers potentially to win this series, outside of just the fact that LeBron and Luka are LeBron and Luka, is that a Luka pick and roll, whether it have been with Jackson Hayes, who is a very good lob threat, despite his many flaws that he sometimes has on the basketball court. He is a good athlete. He is a good lob threat. And even if you get a Luka LeBron pick and roll, still going to be very effective. And the thought would have been that Rudy Gobert may have struggled in that. Now, the Lakers just didn't get that going, part of which was they just didn't do it often enough. There just didn't seem to be any initiative for them to try and abuse that pick and roll and see if it could expose Rudy Gobert in any capacity. No guarantee that it would have, but they didn't really seem to try as much as I thought they would. It also didn't help that they just played Jackson Hayes off the floor. It became very clear early on in the series that Jackson Hayes was not going to be overly effective. And if they weren't going to get him involved in pick and rolls, out he went, and in came Dorian Finney-Smith, and that saw us see moments where the Lakers' depth was exposed, like when they played their entire five guys for an entire half. Hence, the end of the fourth quarter, they were done. Hence, they lost because the Timberwolves came back and took the win. We also see moments where Game 5 of the series, Jackson Hayes isn't on the floor. Well, sure, Rudy Gobert might not have the most fancy finishes and the greatest touch known to man, but he sure can finish over the tallest guy on the floor being 6'9", or sometimes the guy defending him being like 6'7". So Rudy Gobert is going to explode for one of his best offensive performances in his playoff career. So that lack of a five-man for the Lakers or any type of valuable size, and being able to potentially look at Rudy's weaknesses on the defensive end and getting him way out to the three-point line, they didn't get to expose that either. So they got the bad end of the matchup in potentially Rudy Gobert getting the size mismatch on the offensive end, whilst not getting to take advantage of his disadvantages on the defensive end and getting him pulled out to the three-point line, getting the pick and roll going. Without that, it was going to be tough for the Lakers to do anything here. I touched on the depth. Their depth is terrible. Jordan Goodwin, you're an NBA player. Respect to you, my friend, but you should not be getting playoff minutes. but he did. And that's part of the Lakers' issue as well. Luka was solid. LeBron was solid. Their efficiency wasn't amazing, but it was good. Austin Reeves was more of an issue, but the two main guys showed up. It was the fact that the center matchup was terrible for them, the depth was bad, and the defense didn't show up like it did down the stretch of the season, which, given the personnel they have, kind of checks out. But kudos to Minnesota, man. They showed up. Jalen McDaniels was great. Julius Randle had one of his better playoff series. They certainly showed up, but I think it really exposed some of the weaknesses that this Lakers roster has, even with LeBron and Luka on the team.
Yeah, I think, you touched on a lot of it. I think one of the biggest things is you see, a lot of these teams face, LeBron or Luka in the playoffs, like separately, like before they were together. And there's always like something that teams could exploit one way or another, like whether like LeBron teams like in the past, like just maybe didn't have much depth or didn't have a big, or like Luka teams, it's like you exploit his defense on the perimeter and stuff. And I feel like the Timberwolves are really like were zeroed in, and they basically exploited everything that the Lakers gave to them. And that was kind of the difference in the series. I think they did it so well that's why the series was, so quick. I think people probably thought even if they did allow this or that, it was still probably going to go 6 or 7 games, and it really didn't just because of that. I mean, you know that I'm, I guess, like not afraid to, put blame on LeBron and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people are blaming Luka and stuff because of his defense, but to me, I think that the biggest miscue in the series, it falls on JJ Redick. I've said before the season, I was not super confident in that choice as a coach. And granted, he's only had 1 year under his belt, but it just seemed like he was very stubborn, like playing those guys the whole second half. It's one thing if you decide to do it, but I didn't like how in the post-game press conference in that game, he basically said, we made that decision at halftime. You can't make a decision at halftime for the rest of the game because you don't know how the rest of the game is going to go. And especially there in Game 5, doesn't play Jackson Hayes at all, and Rudy Gobert has the best playoff game of his career. I think that's probably fair to say, and he's played about 70 or so games. You can't just do that and like not make adjustments, especially when you're losing in the series. If you're up 3-1, that's a different story because then you can keep rolling with whatever's working. But if you're down 3-1, you have to adjust things the right way. And putting in a guy who hasn't played since January and had never played in a Lakers uniform, I'm talking about Maxi Kleber, like that's not the answer. Like he didn't really do anything out there. And it's kind of disrespectful, I feel like, to the guys who were playing like up until the end of the season when they had their best run. But I even said like earlier in the year, it felt like a lot of their defense was just kind of, catching the right days on people missing threes. The Timberwolves were actually missing a lot of threes in that last game, but most of the series they were hitting them. That last game was terrible, and it seems like they were already checked out from the game that they had to play 5 guys the whole time, and they blew a lead. So that's kind of like what it boils down to. I think also in this series, we see Austin Reeves, who throughout the season was one of the best at getting to the free throw line. They weren't buying it. The refs were not buying it in this playoffs, and that's why he had such a bad series. The Timberwolves, like, I think that this was definitely a series where a few guys really were trying to like get NBA fans apologies, Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert specifically. Because I'm not gonna lie, like Anthony Edwards had a great series, but in a way, it almost felt like he could have done more, which is crazy to say, but it felt like he could have even had a better series. But the reason, too, that they also won is just because guys like Randall and Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert, like, all stepped up. DiVincenzo, Naz Reid was big. I'm pretty sure Naz Reid in the first round was he third or fourth in the league in, like, fourth quarter points or something like that? So, yeah, they all showed up, and that's what it takes to win in the playoffs too, is like winning as a team, especially against a team with maybe you could argue one of the best duos in the league, like the Lakers. So
Definitely. It's definitely a good team showing. And the scary thing going into the next round for their opponents, not necessarily for Minnesota, was the fact that like gilgeous-alexander Walker and Dante DiVincenzo were no-shows offensively in this series.
Yeah.
So as much as they were very good in this series, there is still offensively room for them to grow. And the fact that they were able to exploit the Lakers' weaknesses this badly, very good showing to Chris Finch and the coaching staff that they're going to be able to do well through the rest of this run. And like you say, compared to a first-year coach in JJ Redick, first-year coach, first playoff series against an experienced coach and team in the Timberwolves, not going to ring the panic bells yet, but certainly something to keep an eye on moving forward for them.
I just know, too, with him is like you could kind of get the impression even before he was coaching that he's very strong about his opinions, which is fine. You know, you want to believe in yourself, but you also don't want to be closed-minded. That's why I also didn't like his response. I'm sure you saw it when that guy asked about, like, are you going to lean on any assistants? And he basically, like, stormed out. Like, I feel like you can't do that, especially when you're losing the series, you know? Like, I'm sure he talks to the assistants a lot. Like, he's around them all the time, but you just can't have something like that happening. Like, you got to be open-minded. And I think that's going to be the biggest test for next year and the year after that, is seeing how open-minded he is to trying new things, but also like not things that are going to ruin your team, you know, like playing five guys the whole half, especially Luka, who just came off an illness. Like that didn't make any sense to me. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you want, though, we can move along here to the last series, and then we got a little mini game, of course. This series was probably one of the more entertaining ones, I would say, until the last game of the series. Then it really was not. But the Nuggets and the Clippers, a 4-5 matchup. It went 7 games, as you would expect, and it was the Nuggets who came out on top. Me personally, I thought the Clippers would win this series just because, you know, the Nuggets fired their head coach at the end of the year. You know, and just the Clippers had a really good defense throughout the year too. But what do you make of this series, and now what the Clippers have to do in the summer? Because I think they at least thought they were going to get through this series.
Yeah, I think they thought so as well. I sure did. I thought it was going to be a battle, but I did think the Clippers were going to have the upper hand here. It was an interesting series for me in how they approached it. I think that a guy like Kawhi should have got a lot more of the ball. Part of that is him just needed to be more assertive with it, because he was great offensively in the series. I mean, 40% shooting from three in him in a series is great. Well over what you typically get from him in terms of efficiency in a playoff series from the field. He was great. Problem was he didn't even scratch 18 shots a night, which for a guy at Kawhi's caliber probably isn't enough. But I felt like I could have said this for a lot of guys throughout the series. I thought there was games where Norm Powell got it going, where he wasn't getting the ball enough. And there was probably games where Harden had it going, where he probably didn't have the ball enough. Now, there was also probably games where he was a little bit too involved when he was bad, because the James Harden experience is very much parts of the ups and downs. But there was a lot of mouths to feed here, and I don't know if they always were feeding the right mouths at the right time. Who I will give the shout out to is Ivica Zubac. He was amazing in this series. Offensively, great. You can see the improvement on that end. But that is by far the best series I have and may ever see defensively against Nikola Jokic. Jokic still did what Jokic does to an extent, but even in certain games in this series, Jokic didn't actually do what Jokic does, which is crazy because that doesn't happen. So shout out to Zubac for being as well as he was against Nikola Jokic. He made him work for everything he got in this series. And then Batum tried to do what he could off the bench, but that was obviously a tough matchup for him. But Zubac did what he could. As far as the Nuggets go, obviously Jokic did what he could, but he struggled here against Zubac, which is fair enough. But shout out Christian Brown. I had doubts of him coming into now the starting lineup as they continue to lose depth pieces over the last 2 years from Bruce Brown and now KCP, but he continued to be very good. Shout out MPJ for battling through a shoulder injury, for having quite a few good games in this series. Aaron Gordon continues to be one of my favorite role players in the league. The cutting, the rebounding, abusing any of those mismatches that he has in the post. And Jamal Murray, not quite the playoff Murray still that we saw a few years ago, but in the moments, he can still sometimes show up, and he did that when he needed to in this series, especially later on over those last few wins that they had in games 5 and 7. So shout out to Jamal, shout out to the Nuggets, but for the Clippers, it's tough.
Yeah.
They battled. Kawhi was healthy, and they finally saw a glimpse of what that could be, even without Paul George. But it still wasn't enough. It's hard to say you want to blow it up, but it still wasn't enough. And that's another year into the Kawhi Leonard era where you don't even get a playoff win. It's tough to keep moving forward.
Yeah, and with that point on Jamal Murray, I will say, though, like, it did feel like he had a lot more, like, pure shots in this series. Like, shots that were literally, like, barely touched the net, which you haven't seen probably since the championship run. So I guess that's a good sign. But what I will say in general with the Clippers, this was finally like a series that we could see, and it's like you can't really make excuses. Like the last few years, it's like, oh, Kawhi's not 100%. Oh, Kawhi is out. Paul George is out. Like we're missing our guys and stuff like that. But this time you really couldn't use that. And granted, I do think I don't know about you, but I feel like really Kawhi was probably the best player in this series. And part of that is because Zubac played such good defense on Jokic, but I really feel like Kawhi was the top player and they just didn't give him the ball enough. Sure, he needs to demand it, but I also think he's the ultimate safety net that they just need to defer to him a lot when times get tough. I think they kind of tried doing that a little bit in the third quarter of that game 7, but then they quickly veered away from it, and then that's when the run exploded. But he hit like the first 2 shots of that quarter, and then it was just all downhill from there. I think that, there's definitely a lot of attention on James Harden and his playoff lapses more now than ever. Norman Powell had a very up and down series. I would say more down than up. But, he just didn't really play like the guy who was nearly an all-star this year. And some of the role players were good, but I think mostly, more than anything, what this series boils down to, it's kind of similar to the Lakers series. But I would say this one's even worse because Ty Lue got outcoached by a guy who's been a head coach for about 8 or 9 days, or 8 or 9 games. And that's just really bad. I've been critical of Ty Lue for the last couple years now. I've even met the guy, and I still don't buy it, with him. I feel like he just doesn't make changes that need to be made. I would argue he lost him the game in game 4 at the end there. You have a lineup in, you got Kawhi, you got Zubac, but then you also have Norman Powell and James Harden in. Both those guys are guarding bigs down there. And granted, no one could have expected Jokic would airball and then Aaron Gordon's going to tip in for a dunk. But rebounding was such a critical part of why they lost this series. And in that situation, you can't have 2 guys in there that aren't going to get rebounds, especially over an Aaron Gordon, who's a lob threat. He's like a 2-time should have been dunk contest champion. So that's, and you could have had Chris Dunn in the game. He did not. He could have had Derrick Jones Jr. in the game, who conveniently in that respect beat him in a dunk contest, so he can get up. But he did not. And I feel like too, with after game 7, he said something like, I was looking at OKC, not vacation. Well, you have to look at what's in front of you right now. You can't look past the Nuggets. It's not like they're just going to roll over. They have the best player in the league and one of the better closers in the league when he's at 100%, Jamal Murray, and a championship core. And then I think before game 7 too, the other thing that irked me was he said he didn't remember if he was starting Nicholas Batum or not. How do you not remember? Even if you can't even say that as a joke, because now that you lost the game, it's just going to look even worse. So I don't know. I'm almost to the point where I feel like they could very well move on from Ty Lue and bring up one of those assistants to be the head coach. That might seem a little bold just because he's been there for so long and probably has a good connection with Steve Ballmer and Lawrence Frank and stuff, but there's no excuse for Ty Lue anymore either. So
yeah, unless it's gonna throw a massive upset in Kawhi and you still want to keep him around, I think there's definitely an argument to do so. Like you say, he has been around and might have a connection. Can also make the argument he's been around for a long time and they haven't done anything since he's been there. So not to where the expectations have been, at least. So there's certainly an argument where they could be looking to make a change there. I think you made a great point based on what we've seen in this series. There's certainly an argument that there could be some reasons in terms of his postseason adjustments and postseason decisions that could certainly justify a change there. Are they going to do that? They seem to be pretty content with the status quo unless it involved giving money to Paul George. So I'm not exactly betting on them making any drastic changes, but I think it's certainly something they should be considering.
Yeah, and they need shooting badly because they just did not have the shooting threats on the team. You need like a guy like Luke Kennard who they used to have. He would have helped out tremendously, I think, in this series. And Nicholas Batum had like so much weight on his shoulders because he had to do everything. He had to defend Jokic. He had to, play make. He had to set screens, and he had to hit corner threes. Like, it was just too much to ask for a guy who's, I don't even know how old he is now, like, what, 36, 37? Like,
something like that.
And yeah, so yeah, okay. So yeah, if you want, we can keep it pushing here. Move on to the final topic here, which I call the round robin roses mini game. So this would be kind of a quick one that we'll rattle through, but basically, have a little Derrick Rose themed. So Derrick Rose's career high in a first round series was 27.6 points per game. That happened his MVP season 2011 against the Indiana Pacers. We were just talking about Paul George. That was that team with Danny Granger, Roy Hibbert, some of those guys. But basically what I'm going to ask you is the leading scorer for all 8 of the losing teams in the playoffs. I'm going to give you just the name of the scorer, and you're going to tell me if their scoring average was higher or lower than Derrick Rose's highest output. Granted, his prime happened in a lower paced era, so his scoring average might be lower than what some of the stars might be today, but we'll see how you do here. So are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, so we'll just go in the order of how we listed them in the show. So the first series with the Miami Heat, it was still Tyler Hero, but was his over or under Derrick Rose. Now, reminder, Derrick Rose averaged 27.6 in that series.
For Tyler Hero, I don't even know if he was over 20 in this series. If he was, I don't think it was by much. So we're going to take the under on Tyler Hero.
And you are correct. It is under. Under D Rose and under 20. So you were double correct. It was 17.8. Granted, if he had a decent game 4, he might have been close. Maybe like 23 or something. But he had like 4 points in that last game. So
yeah,
it was rough. Okay, so the second question we got here, second person, Paolo Banchero, was he higher or lower?
Paolo Banchero, he had a lot of volume in this series. Yeah, he had to do a lot. Got to the free throw line a fair bit. Somewhat efficient, especially from 3 compared to what you'd normally expect from him. And he was shooting a decent amount of them. I'm going to take the over here. And you will be over enthused that I can say you are correct. Yeah, he averaged 29.4 points per game. So it was a pretty high volume series indeed. But right now you're 2 for 2. Third one, we'll see how you do on this one, but it is Cade Cunningham, over or under? Cade Cunningham. Again, a lot of volume from Cade, but probably not quite as much as Paolo. Really struggled from 3 at times in this series, and at least had a little bit more help offensively. This was also a very low-scoring series. I think I'm inclined to take the under here for Cade Cunningham.
And you're 3 for 3. You are correct. His was a little bit closer. It was 25 right on the dot. So
okay,
not too far away. Now number 4, we got for the Bucks, Giannis, over or under?
Oh, Giannis. Efficiency wasn't quite as high as I would have expected, but he had some big games in the series. I got to take the over here.
And you are correct. It is over. Averaged 33 points per game, the most in the first round, actually, which is kind of impressive because, like you said, it wasn't like an incredibly efficient, series. So right now you're 4 for 4. We'll see how you end up here. So number 5, we got actually a tie between 2 players, but those players being Ja Morant and Scottie Pippen Jr. Um, what's their scoring average over or under Derrick Rose?
Well, as much as Scottie Pippen Jr. did have a great playoff series, I don't think he was quite touching the average of the best first round series average of Derrick Rose. So I think we're going to take the under on this one.
If it was Scottie Pippen Sr.'s first round high, then maybe we'd have a different conversation. But you are correct. It is under. I'd actually wonder what Scottie Pippen Senior's high is, and if it's higher than 27.6. It's probably got to be close, and it's probably got to be that year that Jordan retired and stuff. So, okay, so you're 5 for 5 right now. If you get the last 3, you will come out victorious, 8 for 8. So, are you ready for number 6?
Do it.
All right, number 6. So we got the Rockets, Alperen Şengün, over or under.
Alperen Şengün, a stinker or 2 in this series. Volume wasn't crazy, and although he shot a few threes, wasn't exactly at anywhere near a high volume. So unless you're at Giannis levels of production, it's tough without those threes, nor are his free throw numbers that high. I think we're taking the under here for Şengün.
And you are correct. It is under at 20.9 points per game. Weirdly enough, for Derrick Rose's career first round average, he would have been barely over. It was because D Rose in his career in the first round, he averaged 20.82. So very close to that number, but for his high in the first round, he did not eclipse it. So you are 6 for 6. You got 2 more left. Number 7 with the Lakers, we got Luka Doncic, over or under.
Luka Doncic, again, you're getting free throws with Luka, so that helps. Relatively efficient in this series. The defense, you could talk about it, but the offense was still there. I feel pretty okay saying that we're going to take the over with Luka here.
And you're correct. It is over. 30.2 points per game. So he was about 2.5 points above it. Okay, so right now you're 7 for 7. It all comes down to this. And it is the Clippers. Leading scorer for the series was Kawhi. Was he over or under Derrick Rose's value?
Well, we were just talking earlier about Kawhi being efficient but not getting enough volume. I don't think he had enough volume in the series to get that over, so we are going to take the under on Kawhi Leonard.
And that's a fair assessment and a good assessment. You are correct. 25 points per game for Kawhi. And like I said, D Rose was 27.6 for his highs. So, yeah, clean sweep, 8 for 8. How do you feel about that?
I'll take it. We will definitely take that. You know, some of those were a little bit easier. You know, the likes of Scottie Pippen Jr. and Tyler Hero, but you know, it's a few debatable ones in there. So we'll certainly take that.
Yeah, I think the Paolo one, the Cade one, the Kawhi, maybe you could argue Luka, but I think at least those 3, like for sure, were probably like the hardest ones to figure out.
For sure.
Maybe if I don't even know. That still would have been hard to decide because he got hurt midway through a game. But I was going to say, if I like only said Ja's name for like the Grizzlies, you still might have said lower though because he got hurt midway through game 3. So,
yeah.
But yeah, Şengün seemed pretty fair. I mean, Tyler Hero, Giannis, like those are kind of lopsided one way or another. But 8 for 8, it's a pretty good performance. I got to give it to you.
We'll take it for sure.
Yes, sir. But with that being said, I think that's going to wrap up the episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Got anything you want to add before we close this deal out?
It's hoping for a good rest of the postseason, man. The first round was great. Just hoping for a good next 3 rounds. And I can't say go Raptors, so go basketball, I guess, is where we're at.
There's not like one team in particular you're like hoping for the most right now?
I don't think so. I think I'm pretty neutral at this point. I just want give you a couple of game 7s, some good series. I'm here for it.
That's fair. I would say for me, it's like, you know, obviously, you know, I like Donovan Mitchell, so the Cavs are going to be up there. I like Jokic, so the Nuggets are going to be up there. Although the Nuggets, it's a little bit harder because Westbrook makes me go crazy too. So we'll just see what happens, but hopefully it's going to be a good playoffs, like you said. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for us. Again, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys for watching, and we're out. Peace.